It's opening day for the Red Sox. Welcome, everybody, to Friday Night Flock Talk. I'm Robin Sullivan from the Leather Elves, and I am so glad to be here with you all. Hey, Lori. Hope Minnesota's starting to warm up the way it is a little bit here in New Hampshire. I'm really glad you're all here. And I need to do the reminders. You guys know the drill. To like the Leather Elves on Facebook. That way you will get notifications when we go live. And you'll also be able to catch any surprise sales or pop-up events that we do. And follow the Leather Elves on Instagram, please. I tried to do that. Life's a little crazy right now, but I try to get things posted up on Instagram. And you can subscribe to our YouTube channel, The Leather Elves. So there's a lot going on. Hey, Diane, and the rest of the Friday Night Flock Talkers. You have to say that like 5 times fast and you maybe win a prize. I don't know. I don't have any prizes, but someday I might. So tonight I am so pleased to have the guest that I have with me. We're going to talk about getting set for success, and we're going to talk about errorless learning. So this is Feng Liu. Feng is the director and operator of the Animal Behavior and Conservation Connections and Behavior and Training Solutions. They're an education, show production, and consultancy company. Feng works with a team of birds and staff to provide free flight shows for zoos in the U.S. through Animal Behavior and Animal Behavior and Conservation Connections. That's a tongue twister. And he travels to aviary zoos and aquariums around the world to teach animal training and set up behavior programs through behavior and training solutions. Hey, Feng, how's it going?
Hello, bird nerds, and hello, Robin. Thank you for having me.
It's really nice to have you. It's Fung and I have known each other for quite a while. I'm not going to talk about it because it gets grayer and grayer every week, but we have known each other for a long time, and it's been some of the things that he's done. I don't get to talk to him as often as I would like to, and um, I see these little snippets and I see these really cool things. This is just fun. Maybe you can let people know what we're looking at here.
Oh, just a few clips of some videos of some flights that we've done at a zoo, and kind of gives you folks an idea of what we do, really a brief overview, of some of the work that we do. And most of them are free flights outdoors, with guests. And our goal is just really to make a connection with people and with kids, just to let them see these birds in almost a natural-ish behavior as best as we can get it, to inspire a connection with them. And we find that feature and flight behaviors and natural behaviors is one of the best way to do that.
Yeah, I found, it's interesting the way connections happen. When my son was little, I was working with SaveNature.org, and we had an event called Bowl the Planet. And the kids there weren't any live animals. We didn't have any live animals there, but they were raising money, raising funds for the rainforest, to save an acre of rainforest, to purchase an acre. And I remember they were all so excited and they wanted to be there. They wanted to know, could they go to the acre that they bought? And they just, they were little, Cub Scouts, and they had no idea. But they wanted that tangible experience. And I love that with the Conyers there, the way you make that happen for people.
Yeah, the connection is one of the most powerful component of our program. If we didn't do anything at all, just those birds land on those kids' hands, you can just read it in their faces how it impacts them. At the end of the day, I think is that connection that says it all. That's ultimately what we do. Is to make that connection and hopefully build that contact and let the kids kind of take it from there.
I mean, I used to say when I was working on stuff like this, that if you had one child in a group, one child at a presentation that made that connection and went on to stewardship, then it was a success. It didn't matter, the whole class didn't need to decide they wanted to be bird trainers or that they wanted to, go into biology and, save the environment. But if one kid makes that connection, I feel it's a win. So,
Yeah. I mean, that's what really
so
drives me, constantly.
yeah, it's and I think too, it's we've all been through quite a bit in the last couple of years, and I think it really we need that. We need that it's not I don't want to call it a feel good moment, but we need that connection. We need to feel like there's more than just what's happening in our houses and in our small, our immediate bubble. And I think what you do provides that kind of connection. So
Yeah, people love it, and we love it when they love it.
there you go. So, all right, I think everybody who's an animal trainer of any kind has some like I remember when story. So, how did you get started with animal training?
How did I get started? Well, I think my foundation goes back to my childhood, Robin. I mean, I grew up in Vietnam, and we were out in the rivers and the trees and climbing palm trees and chasing lizards, you know. So that was my connection. That was my education to the world, and
Mhm.
it's my foundation, and it's what's formed me and has guided me. So my connection with animals started way back, as a youngster. And as I'm, growing up and going to school, I was exposed to additional concepts and ideas. And I think one of the major one was when my math teacher in high school, he was a falconer, and he would talk about falconry and how to train, wild birds at the end of the school year. And when I was able to catch that, um, it, it it literally set a hook, in a way, for me. Just the idea that you can work with a wild animal and let it go free, let it fly free, and ask it to come back to you, and it does. That I thought that was pretty incredible, and so I just kind of constantly pursue that idea. Not necessarily falconry per se, but the idea of working with animals in that way, where they will voluntarily come back to you when you ask them to. I thought that was pretty amazing. And then just, additional work and additional experiences came along. My study was in animal science at the University of Delaware. And then I worked and volunteered at a local wildlife rehabilitation facility, where I got a lot of experience and exposure to wild birds. And then just traveling around the country working for different organizations, flying birds at Air Force bases to keep birds off the runway, for example. That was a lot of fun, and then working at different zoos and facilities, training birds and animals in general, all sorts of animals, not just birds.
So,
It's given
so
me a
tell us
really,
you got to tell us about this bird. I just,
oh,
it's
yeah, this is
amazing.
Imataka. Yeah, this is Imataka. She's a harpy eagle. She's at NEI right now. This is when we were younger, when both of us were younger, and we were at a zoo show. And yeah, I worked with her since she was a youngster. I think just a few months old when we picked her up, and she's a powerful bird, as you can imagine by the looks
Mhm.
of her. And the reason that we want to show this photo too, because it does tie into some of the concepts that we're going to be talking about with error reduced learning, is about working with some potentially large and dangerous animals, and how some of these concepts are useful for you when
Mhm.
you're in this kind of scenario. But yeah, that's a very powerful bird.
When you talk about the powerful animals that you might be called to work with. And I think, I was reading a paper that Dr. Friedman wrote on errorless learning, and she was talking about how we've all learned that phrase. If at first you don't succeed, try again. And you learn by going through and making those mistakes. And I read the paper, and it really with a bird like that, or any animal for that matter, do you really wanna put them through that? Do
Or
you
yourself through that.
exactly, and I think about moving right now, I think about my frustration level at times, and my husband has been a saint with as far as, I'm like, no, we need to get this done. We need to do that. And he's like learning as we go. What does she expect of, and he doesn't know what to expect from me. And I have not truly set him up to succeed. And so I think that, we need to, I don't want to anthropomorphize, but I think we do need to sometimes relate it to how we feel as far as that frustration and things like that. So let's jump in. I think this is a concept. And you and I, when I asked you to do this, I think you are the right person for this, because I can tell you all, I have watched Feng train over the years, and I have watched um, him. He's one of the quietest, gentlest trainers I have ever met, and I think it's really a credit to you, Feng, that you have that kind of very calming, comfortable way with animals, and you get great responses because of it. So, um, I guess we need to define. Would you define for people who are listening what errorless learning? What does it mean?
Well, I think we'll try and keep it simple, right? Through our discussion here, we won't go into too much technical jargon, right? Just to It's Friday night after all. But I would
Right.
just say that I would just say that errorless learning is a procedure of learning or teaching where errors in the system are reduced or eliminated through thoughtful arrangement of learning opportunities, right?
Okay.
So basically, do so that the procedure sets us up so that we get more uh, positive results than negative results, to keep it
Okay.
as simple as possible, right? And a lot of that is just through arrangement of antecedents, in what we control. And if I could also mention, Robin, in literature, I mean, it discusses it as errorless learning, but a lot of times when I teach this concept to our trainers, I try to make sure that we think of it as an error reduced teaching procedure, right? So it flips the switch a little bit, because when
Mhm.
we say it's errorless learning, we're saying it's the animal that's learning. The animal has all the responsibility. But when we say it's an errorless teaching procedure, then it's the trainer that has the responsibility in teaching it
Mhm.
correctly, in teaching it errorlessly, right? And I think that's really important to think about, because it drives us to make the better decision rather
Mhm.
than saying the animal has to make the decision.
And I think too, it puts some of that responsibility. It puts the responsibility on us as trainers, and I think
Right.
that's really, really important, because I think a lot of times when you're training an animal, you have an expectation. You set this expectation in your plan in your head, however you choose to do that, and this is what I expect, and this is the way it's going to be. This is the behavior I need to get versus how do I ask for that and make it work for that animal as well. And
Mhm.
does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah, and I think in our training industry, we've gotten better about understanding that training procedures is really about the trainer, right?
Mhm.
And not about the animals in terms of what they learn, because they learn what we teach. And I think when we find ourselves frustrated in a scenario, we should just remember that we created that frustration, right? And so if we created that frustration, we can also create non-frustration as well, you know. So it makes it very easy if we just come back to or say, that raven's not stupid, I'm actually pretty stupid. Um, then it makes it a lot easier, because it gives us a place to start from, or to restart
Yeah.
from, you know, to go
Well,
back and readjust our plan.
I mean, I said to you, I think before we came on, that for me, working with corvids just reminds me of what a crap trainer I am. That it's, and because I'll be like, "Ugh," and the bird has gone A to B to E, and I'm like, wait, what just happened here? And I think,
Yeah.
they all the animals we work with have such wonderful potential, but it's always been for me, the corvids really drive that home. It's
Yeah.
they're the
And
ones
the
that
reason,
yeah.
yeah, and the reason that they sometimes drive us nuts is because not only are they quick to think, but they're also quick to act as well. So that's a
Mhm.
lethal combination, right? So they can process the information so fast, but they can act physically very fast as well, And so
Mhm.
unless you prepare for that to match their speed mentally, but also physically, they usually leave you behind.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So where did this idea come from, Fung? Whose brainchild was this?
Yeah, well, I'm sure, through the years, there's been lots of trainers and practitioners who've used these methods, without documentation, right?
Mhm.
There's been tons and tons and thousands of trainers through our history of human history. But the ones that have done it and have documented it are the famous Skinner,
Mhm.
and Herbert Terrace was more uh, more the recent ones in the 60s or so, where he did a lot more work on this concept, just showing that with learning, there doesn't necessarily have to be mistakes or errors for the learner to learn well, you know, and it's a procedure that works well. And I think for me, it centers on our philosophy of training. It doesn't mean that it's the only method of training that we use, but it helps us formulate a lot of our decisions because of the way we think about the approach. I tend to be more flexible and more, I guess, what's the right word? Um, Practical in our approach. And
Mhm.
so I wouldn't say that I only train using one particular procedure, but we know the power of them, and we may use most of that procedure because it works really well, but it doesn't necessarily apply to every single species or every single animal because of their learning history, you know.
Right. So I mean, I think that is important to think about. So if I bring home this animal or this bird, or I have this bird at home, and I'd like to use the errorless learning technique or approach.
Mhm.
How do I get started with something like that?
Yeah, well, well, first, before you set up a procedure and how to do it, I encourage you to understand it as a philosophy, right?
Okay.
So anyone practicing should say, well, here's my philosophy of interaction with animals. And that philosophy might be, the idea that you want to work with an animal and build a relationship where there's less frustration. And frustration can result in making mistakes, making errors, right? Where there's less or no aggression in that relationship, or anything that we might consider negative, right? So
Mhm.
that's the philosophy that I would form and say, that's why I want to use this procedure. So
Okay.
that's the first start, right? Because sometimes if we don't have that philosophy, then it doesn't guide us with the procedure. If I say, well, I can train with any method, I can use punishment to stop a barking behavior. So then the procedure that I pick does not would not match. And so first we
Mhm.
want to make sure that we uh, understand our philosophy of how we want to work and how we want to live with the animals. And once we identify that philosophy, then we start with the procedure, right?
Okay.
So the procedure is really just that. It's really just about saying, how do I get into a relationship, whether it's training, if we just label as training or interaction, right? How do we get into that interaction where the result is more likely to be successful than to have to be failure?
Let me interrupt you just for 1 second. So you mentioned, that there are other techniques and that you could like you said, you can stop a dog from barking using punishment you know, and I think people need to be aware that it's not all or nothing. It's
Mhm.
it's it. moves in and out, and it's a fluid process, where you can go between different approaches as long as your philosophy kinda stays the same. Does that
Right,
you know, I
right.
don't want people to feel like, okay, if I'm this way, and I want it to, if I feel this way, I can only use this technique. If I feel that way, I can only use that technique. So, I mean,
Yeah.
is that a fair statement to say?
Yeah, I think just to clarify a little bit more to add to that, Robin, I think if you're starting out, it's easier to start with a smaller set of criteria and a smaller
Mhm.
set of procedure so that you can
Okay.
learn those procedures well. And as you accumulate more skills, then you have more options to use, you know. So at the same time, when we want to make sure that everyone's open to learn and understand different procedures, I also don't want to confuse everyone either to say, yeah, we'll just use anything that's convenient, you know.
Yeah.
It comes with time and it comes with understanding as well, you know. Someone might say, well, I can train with negative punishment, you know, effectively. But the term itself sounds pretty horrible, right? Just negative punishment sounds horrible. But used correctly, it's not that horrible, you know. And if it's a way to achieve behavior change quickly and effectively, it may be the best solution of any of the solution we have, you know.
Mhm.
So it's really about the outcome and the procedure too, you know, all together, just kind of mesh together and be able to evaluate what is the cost versus the outcome of that. You know, for example, if we're training a biting dog, you know, with positive reinforcement, that's taken 2 months to get the desired behavior versus a negative reinforcement procedure that takes 2 days, you know. So then
Mhm.
we have to evaluate, right? Is that negative reinforcement that horrible, or are we stretching this dog's learning opportunity through 2 months worth of learning, you know, while it's struggling about and biting people and such, you know? So what's the value, you know? So for me, I have to weigh all that, you know, to
Mhm.
know what's good for me in my philosophy. How does that guide me, you know, and the animals I work with.
Yeah, I know, having worked with, rehabs, facilities that are doing rehab with animals for exhibit, not necessarily for demos, or that they may eventually want to use for a demonstration, versus somewhere that's doing, a daily show that's got to be produced, that's got to get out there. I've had this dialogue with people about, well, which approach are we going to use? I remember years ago, one of my mentors in the raptor handling world used to, just have people go in with the rehab bird. She had several eagles who were being rehabilitated and but were non-releasable, and it was just having people go into their enclosures and working with them and talking to them and to kind of get them used to people and do desensitization is what she was calling it, versus another person that had to do that high fast paced show at a facility every day. And I remember him saying to me, I don't have time for that, I've got to do it this way. And
Hmm.
neither approach was doing any harm to the animals. They were,
Yeah,
being well cared for. There was no, nothing detrimental to the animals. It was just two very different approaches because of two different needs. And I think that
yeah,
needs to
yeah.
come into play as well.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, so much of what we do, you know, especially with the work that I do with the zoos, you know, that's one of the major conversation that comes up, and it's about resources. You know, the resources
mhm,
drive our decision. And yeah, resources, time and money, what it comes down to, you know. And what we do in a professional show is very different from what you do at home, you know,
mhm,
and how you care for your animals. And that comes down to resources. It comes down to the time that you have. It comes down to the thought process that you have to put into it, you know, and then there's
mhm.
the actual furniture as well, you know, to help us do our work.
Yeah. And I think people too, depending on what the situation is at home, it may be, I need to work on this training. I need to do this training. I need to work on this behavior for a very specific reason. It may be a safety reason. It may be, you know, we're having a party in 2 weeks and there's going to be 50 people here and I need this bird to be behaving in a certain way, or I need this to
mm,
be, I need it to be in this situation. And I think the physical setup matters so much more as well. And resources, as far time is the big one. We talk to people all the time about, how much people say to me, well, how much time do I have to spend training? Not do I have to, how much time should I? How much time does my bird have to be out? How much time and time is so precious to people. And,
mm.
but they want to know there's got to be that you know, roadmap for how long.
Yeah.
And I always tell people it really depends. I mean, I don't think you can say, I'm going to train this bird in X amount of time and it's going to have this result. I mean, that's unrealistic.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah, I
So,
think what you just said kind of echoes what I say when I teach at the zoos too. If they could hear what you said, they'd probably be laughing too because it sounds just like me. When they ask me a question about something, I start out with it. Well, it depends, and sometimes it gets funny, but it's also can be frustrating too because people want answers. But it's variable, because we don't live in a vacuum. There's so many variables, resources, time, and all that. It comes into play. But what we can start with is a philosophy. You know, we at least have to know what we want. What is it that we want, for ourselves and for the animals we live with? Start with that, and then we can
yeah.
find the procedure to meet our philosophy to guide us through life.
All right.
Yeah.
So we've assessed the situation and now we decide that errorless learning or errorless training is
Error
the
reduced
way
teaching.
to teach.
Hmm.
Okay. So how do we get started? After
Yeah.
we've,
So let me Yeah, so let me describe a procedure so that your listener can kind of get an understanding of why we're talking about this. What does this mean, or what's it different? How's it different, you know,
Mhm.
from um, from a standard discrimination trial, right? So let's say a standard discrimination trial. If you're teaching an animal to select red, and you have red and green, right? So you have a red button and a green button. A standard discrimination trial, you might have that those two buttons set equally distant from that animal, right? So one to the left, one to the right at the same distance. And so you're asking the animal to choose. And hopefully, if it starts to lean towards red, let's say red is the hot target that you want, it leans towards red, you reinforce it, right? It may also lean towards right, in which case you don't reinforce it, right? And so now that's the trial and error component of it, right? So it has an equal chance of making a choice on either side, right? So that's a standard discrimination procedure. Now, with an error reduced teaching procedure, we make it so that the green button is more like, oh, sorry, the red button is more likely to be pressed, right? Again, the red button is the hot target. How would we do that? We make the red button easier to access than the green button, right? So
Mhm.
then, therefore, we would put the red button closer to the animal and the green button further from the animal, making green harder to reach while red is easier to reach, making the right choice easier for the animal to make, therefore less errors, right?
Mhm.
So if the choice is easier to make, the animal is more likely to make it, therefore earning reinforcers, right? So that's really the basic concept of error reduced teaching is
Mhm.
create an environment, the antecedent control, where the right choice is easy to make so that the animal doesn't make errors.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
That's great. I mean, I love it because it's not that, because sometimes when you're training, I feel like if you're not using this technique, I think in some ways it's almost the grand challenge.
Hmm.
It's not, I'm gonna make you figure out what I'm asking for. And I think we as trainers sometimes, absolutely, Laura, you set them up to succeed. I think as trainers, we want our animals to succeed. We want this to work. And but maybe we don't ask in the right way, or we don't communicate it.
Yeah, yeah, you're right. I mean, I think that's part of the difference in talking about it. where in this procedure, it's really about asking, whereas in other procedure, it's about demanding, right?
Mhm.
And so that's really the difference in the two. When we
Mhm.
ask, because we say we want you to be successful, therefore we are asking, can you do that? If you can't, then we're going to make it easier for you to achieve that result. You know,
Mhm.
and let me also point out, Robin, in addition to kind of twisting a little bit in terms of when we say errorless learning to error reduced teaching, I would also say that the result of practicing that procedure gets us to effortless learning on the animal's part,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
And that actually I arrived by accident because in one of your texts to me, when you asked me to do this chat with you, you had said you had asked me to do a talk on effortless learning, and I don't know if that was by mistake of on purpose, but but it's perfect because that's the outcome that we want, right? Is
Yeah.
through error reduced teaching, we want effortless learning, and that's really the easiest way to talk about it.
Well, and I think, if we think about ourselves and how we learn and our animals and to learn to be a trainer, to learn to be a good trainer and to become a better trainer, I think we need mentors that give us the tools that we need, that help us discover those tools. And if we want our animals to have a reduced number of errors when they're learning, then we need to make sure that we're giving them those tools that they need. And, I think sometimes we don't always, it's about that communication piece. It's about requesting a behavior, not like you said, not dictating a behavior. And so my question is, he is effortless. There you go. Um, if the so once you've established, okay, we're going to move the red button closer. We're going to make that a little bit, easier. Um,
Mhm.
how do you begin to do you begin to up your criteria? How does that work?
Yeah, some of that comes with experience and judgment, right? As you learn,
Mhm.
because making that decision is not easy with no information at all. So you have to have some information. So whether you've learned it on another animal, on another bird, or you just have to learn it on this one bird that you're working with at this time. So
Okay.
in a way, it's not a perfect scenario because you're learning too, right? So you're making mistakes as well in the process. So it's an error reduce strategy, we hope. It's not it's
Right.
not it's not empty of errors, right? There's going to be errors in there somewhere. And most of that is because of us as a trainer, right? Because we're asking too much, for example, of the animal to approximate too quickly, or we're not moving fast enough, right? So we're staying too long at one approximation and not moving along quick enough. Therefore, the
Mhm.
animal gets stuck in that procedure. So some of that just depends on your observation skill, and then you have to learn how to judge when to move on and when not to move on.
Right.
You can talk to people, you can read and things, but most of that's going to come from the work that you do with your animal. Where you
Mhm.
say, well, if I approximate that button, 3 inches away, and he's not even looking at it at all, then it says, well, I've moved too quickly. Or if you've done, let's say, 5 repetitions at the same distance, and then you start to move, and the animal doesn't want to move anymore because it's been reinforced at that same distance 5 times, then you say to yourself, "Oh, I stayed there too long." You know.
Okay.
So some of this, while we say it's a science, it's also an art as well. Just figuring out what's right and what's not, what's too much and what's too little.
Mhm. I think, observation skills are key. We talk about so much about procedure and how the mechanics of how we're gonna make this happen. And, you as a novice trainer, people worry about how am I gonna get that reinforcer to that animal in time? And I think, that taking that kind of step back and looking at the whole picture is really important. I mean, do you ever videotape your training sessions so that you can like look at that and see what's going on?
Yeah, we do. And when we work with our clients, we encourage them to, to bank videos so that they can watch it and I can watch it as well. Sometimes it feels
Mhm.
like an inconvenience, because it's an extra thing we do. And sometimes it is an inconvenience because we've got resources, right? We've got time and we've got schedule to keep. But
Yeah.
those videos certainly pay off. And sometimes I know
Mhm.
personally, sometimes I cringe, when I know the session isn't going great, but it's being recorded. But it becomes so much more valuable at a later time when we can
Mhm.
compare success and failures, yeah, you can always delete later, but you can't go
Right.
back and record it, you know. Yeah.
It's so
Yeah,
true.
so that
And I think go ahead.
no, go ahead. Yeah.
I think sometimes it's that you don't see it in the moment or you don't, sometimes it's just a fresh set of eyes. I know, we have colleagues that have called and said, "Hey, can you just come over and take a look at I don't understand why I'm stuck here.
Hmm.
Why
Yeah.
this isn't working."
Yeah.
And it's a very simple fix, but it's just that
Yeah.
different set of eyes, you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
And it's a learning curve, and you mentioned observation skill is so important in what we do, Robin. But I would say all of it is really important, including
mhm,
mechanical skills, how we move things, how do we move our hand so the bird can land on our hand, how do we move to deliver food, all that matters. Because think of it, we demand excellence from the animals we work with, right? We say,
mhm,
well, when I ask you to fly from point A to point B, we want you to fly to point A to point away, you know, um, or
mhm,
step up on my hand without biting me, correctly. We demand those behaviors, but we don't demand that of ourselves. We don't demand
mhm.
that, yeah, when we put our hand up, we got to put our hand up correctly so that that bird can step on appropriately. That's, I think, more often than not, is a piece that we miss, you know, is that self evaluation and making sure that we're doing it correctly so that we can
Mhm.
elicit the correct behavior from the animals.
Well, and I think, we sometimes forget how aware our animals are of what we're doing. I was working with a zoo and I was working with the elephant manager, and we were talking about, how things change in the yard. And he said to me, a change of 2 inches with of the big tire that's out there. You move that 2 to 3 inches, and it completely changes how the elephant interacts and what happens for that day. And with our birds, they are a lot of the birds. People who are listening, the birds we have at home are prey species, and so there's that kind of hypervigilance that happens. And
Mhm.
you, like you say, one day this may be the cue, and then the next day we kind of go like that. Well, that's something completely different.
Mhm.
So,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So I mean, if you're working your birds at home, I would urge you to think also about what you're doing as well, because it's just so easy for us to say, that stupid bird should know what I'm asking, but what we're asking is in multiple languages,
Mhm.
so that's why they struggle to elicit the behavior that we're asking for.
Yeah, and I think that, when we talk about I was working with clients and we were talking about, cues, what does the bridge need to be? And, I used to say to them, "Well, it doesn't have to it doesn't have to be anything in particular, it's whatever really works for you," and it should be something maybe that you don't say just every single day in conversation. And,
Right.
I've had clients that have come up with some really unique bridges, and that's okay, because it's just what works, and then
Yeah.
some of them maybe we wouldn't wanna talk about in public, but it it happens. But I think,
Yeah.
you're right, that language piece, we forget about that. We forget
Mhm.
about, um, I as much as our birds respond, and they respond to words that we use, there's still that learning that needs to happen for what does that mean to that animal? Oh,
Yeah.
sure, Nick, put up this picture, and I just might as well be quiet now.
Or- yeah.
Dang.
That is that's a baby sacred falcon. That's probably about two-ish days old or so.
Oh, so
And
cute.
well, speaking of falcon, I'm going to show you one as well. We happen to have one here. Let's see if I can bring him up.
Just happen to have one here under my desk.
Yeah, this is a lanner falcon, different species. This one's about, I think, 2.5 weeks or so. This is a little boy. And
That's
sometimes
so
we let them grow up with us. Sometimes we let them grow up with the parents. And sometimes we do
cool.
both. Sometimes we let them grow up with the parents and then we socialize them into our presence as well. Kind of like these other guys here, which we do that with. These, you folks probably will recognize more. Anyone know what kind of babies these are?
Oh,
Enough feather coloring in there to give you any hints?
anybody out there?
Burlish. Yep, it's a baby, all right.
Good answer, Lori.
The, these are sun conures. These are baby
Nice.
sun conures. Yeah.
Amy Pritchard is
So,
on Fung, and she said, "Show and tell with Fung."
oh yeah.
That's
Yeah, I
right.
was just on the phone with her earlier today. Um, yeah, so with these conures, what we do is we just play with them, socialize with them for about half an hour or so a day, and then put them back with mom and dad to take care of them.
Mhm.
Kind of like grandparents. You
Yeah.
just play with them and let mom and dad take care of them for the
Yes.
rest of the day.
There
Yeah.
we go.
Yep.
So
Sun conure.
the good job. So as far as so now you've got the Lantern Falcon there and the conures. Same technique, right? If you do the assessment and you kind of look and say, okay, this is how I want to do it, you can use this same approach with both species, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Pretty much. I mean, the error reduced teaching strategy pretty much encompasses our main philosophy of working with the animals, Robin.
Mhm.
There will be exceptions, of animals that come to us that already have certain behaviors that require different procedures, for example. But if they have grown up around us, that's usually the technique that we use. That's usually the procedure that we use.
Yeah.
And so part of that, so the bigger picture of with these guys would be, as far as the error reduced teaching strategy, is that they're now learning their environment, right? From a young
Right.
age. They learn with me talking around them, with videos, with lights. I take them on drives, right? So all of these stimulus comes to them casually. So
Hmm.
there's no stress involved in it, as opposed to if they're older and then now they're exposed to this foreign environment, then it's more to learn. Then they can commit more errors. For example, there's more of a flight response, for example, to some of these
Hmm.
stimulus. um, but if they're learning it now, then none of that errors, or at least those errors, are reduced, when they see them
Right.
as they get older as well. Yeah. So it's that philosophy, right? As I mentioned earlier.
Hmm.
So we want to teach them from a very young age, so it just becomes normal for them.
Yeah, and I think it feels right. It feels more comfortable. And it feels like there's more animal welfare, that their welfare is better if with this
Hmm.
approach. That
Hmm.
because it's more of a give and take in that responding as a trainer. So it's really about fixing me before I try to change a behavior or shape a behavior with an animal. And so as we're talking, I'm wondering, how successful do you think people could be with rehomed birds. So, a bird that comes into your life that you may or may not know their history.
mhm.
How would you approach something like that?
Well, I think it can be very valuable because of the potential baggage that some of those birds come with. Both baggage, but also unknown as well, you know. And
Mhm.
so if you don't know, and if you don't know what potential negative or undesired behaviors can be there, then your procedure in asking for behaviors can help even avoid them altogether, where you don't even
Mhm.
see any of those undesired behaviors, right? Meaning, for
Yeah.
example, if we give examples to kind of put into a real world scenario. So if I bring a new bird home with me, let's say a standard procedure that someone might teach you is that, well, you just go and put your hand up and see if the bird will step up on your hand. You know, it's a trial and error procedure, right? So yeah, if we're lucky, it may step right on your hand. If you're not, you just bleed for the next 10 minutes. So that's one procedure. The other
Okay.
procedure is an error reduced teaching strategy where you give the animal a chance. You ask it, if it wants to step up or not, by simply just offering your hand far enough away where it doesn't necessarily reach you physically, and then it earns something of value for that, and
Mhm.
as it now it's making a trip to you, and then it's then reinforced for that choice rather than simply being offer either to get on or not, right? So these are, in a way, common sense, but it wasn't always common sense, right? Do you remember way back when there were, teachers that would tell us, yeah, to get that parrot to stop biting you, you simply just endure the pain until it stops biting
Yeah.
you, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Don't
Uh,
react. Just
hmm
don't
hmm
react. Leave your hand
hmm
there until he
Because
stops.
yeah, right. Because if you react, then the bird wins, right? Yeah. Yeah. So there's a different way to do it.
Mhm. And I think
Yeah.
jokingly, the bird wins, right? But
hmm
I feel
hmm
like with, you know, this approach, there's a bigger potential for win. There
hmm
it's not there, and we as trainers are not there's not we get a win, but we don't have to win. Okay? So that if that statement makes any sense to you, you know, there's success and we get the win that way and we our animals have better quality of life because they're being
hmm
asked, not told to do things. And it's not a horrible situation where they're being made to do things. And I
Yeah.
think that comes through that choice. I
hmm
choice is the new, it's the kind of I feel like choice is the new buzzword, even though we've been
hmm
using it for a lot of years, but now it's the hot topic. It used to be foraging,
Right.
now
Right.
choice. Choice is the
hmm
thing,
hmm Yeah.
and this technique absolutely offers choice.
hmm Yeah. Yeah. It's really just asking, the the consequence of the procedure is that it builds confidence through
Mhm.
asking animals what to do rather than what not to do. You know,
Yeah.
um, and that's really the difference. It just builds confidence because they're constantly doing it right, right? And if you can
Mhm.
imagine, based on our human behavior and how we learn, how empowering, how wonderful it feels when we do it right, when we get it right, versus how punishing it feels when we get it wrong, you know. And
Yeah.
so if within our day, if we have more percentages of getting it right, then we're much quote unquote happier for that, right?
Yeah.
And so I would
Yeah.
imagine that that applies the same to our animals as well.
I would think so, and and if not, there's a if it's not happy, we're not gonna say happy,
hmm
but maybe it's just, I get more sunflower seeds that way, or I get more
hmm
almonds that way, and that is
hmm
satisfying, and I think,
Yeah.
so I've talked to people about this before, and one of the things that has come up is that it's like when people talk about our kids get participation trophies now. Everybody gets a trophy, nobody wins, everybody gets a trophy. Um,
Hmm.
so how do we get around that? This isn't just
Yeah,
here, I'm gonna give you the bowl of sunflower seeds because you're in the same room. Well, it might be. I'm gonna give you this bowl of sunflower seeds because you're in the same room as me. Um,
yeah,
how do we kind of how would you explain to people that this is not simply enabling our birds?
yeah. It's only enabling, and it's only participation awards if your criteria does not escalate, right?
Okay.
So if you say you get this bowl of sunflower seeds being in the same room with me, that might be fine for step one. But if that's
Mhm.
step 10 and step 20, then you're doing it wrong,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So that's the
And
difference,
your
right?
budget for sunflower seeds is way too high.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So really that's the difference,
So
because there's criteria involved in the procedure, and we teach the animals to learn. It's just finding out how much can we ask them to learn without them
Mhm.
making mistakes, right? It's about
Right.
pushing their learning to that edge without causing them to fail. That's the edge that we need
Mhm.
to find.
Yeah, and I think, I've had people tell me over the years, "Oh, well, you gotta earn your stripes and you gotta, you'll get that eventually. You'll know how to do that eventually." And I
Mhm,
think some of it is definitely from experience. It's from doing, a lot of training and a lot of work in the field. And but I think some of it is just really, really focusing on listening, and not just this kind of listening, but listening with your eyes and listening to the situation. I
mhm.
mean, would you agree?
Yeah, I mean, in any training strategy, Robin, it's not just in our reduced teaching strategy, but anytime you work in communication with animals or with
Mhm.
people, it's a feedback loop, right? And so if we're only using one part of that loop, then we're failing, right? Meaning if we're
Yeah.
only giving out the information, then we're failing. So we have to give out and receive that information as well. And that's how we make the next decision, right? So
Mhm.
if we give out information, the animal takes it, acts on it, we have to take that information, process it, so that we can give out the next set of information again. If we're not taking that information in, or not taking it in quickly enough to process the information, again, going back to the corvids, right? The ravens and the crows, that's an example where they're given back information so quickly that we're not taking and processing it quick enough so that we can then give them back information. That's where we're failing, right? Because
Right.
they're giving it back so fast that we can't process it quickly enough. That's where we're disconnected. And that's a
Mhm.
great example of that loop falling apart, right? But if that
Mhm.
loop is maintained, then communication is good.
And I think, from a trainer's perspective, we talk about our animals' welfare and how really want to enhance our animals' overall welfare. But I think this is a situation where, as a trainer, it really enhances your welfare too, because there is that communication happening. There's that relationship building happening. And I think, unless you're in it for the money. Oh, no, wait, that's not the case. Then you wanna build that relationship, and I think you're right, that communication and that feedback loop really does need to occur in order for your animal and for you to have success.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you made a really good point there, Robin, because the philosophy in which you choose to operate within influences your welfare as well. Meaning, for
Mhm,
example, if you choose to be a negative reinforcement trainer, your thought process is different, you know, because you're
mhm,
constantly punishing, and
yeah,
it can't feel good, to be in that atmosphere, you know. But
yeah,
if you're a trainer who's constantly succeeding because your animals are succeeding, your head's also different, you know. I
Mhm.
find myself not screaming as much and not breaking plates, because of a failure, for example. So yeah, I mean, it's a much pleasant day, I guess, if you're
Yeah.
engaged in that kind of a philosophy.
Yeah, I definitely agree. So, all right, we've only gone halfway through what we talked about, what we said we were going to talk about, which is fine because this has been good, I think. One final question for you: what's the measure of success? How do you measure success?
Well, I mean, one way to look at it is to be much more concrete about that measurement, right? So if you're uh, a person who needs those kind of measurements, then you put that down on paper, and measurement success is measured by accomplishing goals, right? So
Mhm.
uh, for me, that's not always the case, but if we have to try and nail it down, then that's really measured by the goals that we set, you know, and we say we're going to use this much resource to achieve this goal, and if we can meet both of those criterias, then that's success. But
Yeah.
sometimes it just depends on the project too. Sometimes we might exceed our resources and to achieve our success, but the success is so valuable that it's justifiable, you know. So I'm not sure
Yeah.
I'm a great person to answer your question concretely, because so
No,
much of
I
it
think
depends.
and I think that's important for people to think about. That, that measure of success, it's not, this occurred, I met this goal, and I'm done. I finished that. I succeeded in that task. And some people are very task oriented, and that's what works for them. Others are not. And it's really, it varies from person to person. And Lori, I know, posted it's a study of one. She commented it's a study of one. And I think it, for us as trainers, it's a study of one. It's a um, the different motivators and what is success to each of us. And I think those are things we need to think about when we look at how we are going to approach an animal and how we're going to approach a training situation. Um, so tell me real doesn't have to be quickly. Everybody will hang out. What kind of services do you offer through ABCC and behavior BTS? What kind of services do you offer and that might be helpful to people who are listening?
Yeah, thank you, Robin. Let me just also add real quick on our topic that we're talking about, and that is anyone is seriously thinking about implementing an error-reduced teaching strategy. One of the ways that you know that you're not doing it well is if you're seeing errors in your system. So if you're seeing errors, meaning the bird's not doing what you're asking it to do, then you're not practicing error-reduced teaching strategy. So you can fix it. What
So
we
when the
do,
words "just not getting this" comes out of your mouth, you know
yes,
you need to kind of reassess what's going on.
yep, I'm doing something wrong, and I'm not practicing an error-reduced teaching strategy.
All right.
Right.
Good to know.
Yeah, well, thanks for asking about what we do, Robin. We do a couple things. One is we put on free flight shows for zoos around the country, and yeah, and I enjoy that a lot because we talked about earlier. I think maybe that was more of our private conversation. I can't remember. Kind of all run together now. But the interaction that we get with the public, especially kids, really drives us to do what we do because we see the connection, we see the contact that the animals create, and that's long
Mhm.
lasting. And I have personal evidence of that. Kids come in to our programs, and then years later, they come back to us, when they're in high school, for example, and they tell us about that memory that they had. So that's really reinforcing for me. So that's what we do. And we also travel to zoos and aquariums to teach animal training and set up training programs for staff and for those facilities as well, based on a number of strategies. And We've been fortunate enough to have had experience in a lot of different taxas. While we've specialized in free fly birds, we work with a lot of other animals as well, animal species, and to be able to share some of the techniques and procedures with um, keepers around the world has also been very um, reinforcing for me too.
Very nice.
If they're
Well, thank you
interested
again.
in finding
Okay.
Oh yeah, if they're interested in finding any information, we have a Facebook page. I don't do a lot of social media or anything social really, but Animal Behavior and Conservation Connections is on Facebook, and you can find information there, and you should be able to reach me through that as well.
All right. Well, thank you again, and it's so nice talking to you. And we will maybe I'll like swing by Delaware on my way to Virginia this summer. AFA is in
When you pick,
Virginia.
yeah, when you pick up the
And
blue Missouri diet.
yeah, that's it. Or not.
Mhm.
All right. Well, again, thank you so much. I do have one thing that I wanted to talk about real briefly tonight. One of our regular members, or not members, but someone who listens all the time, Eva Klein, lost 5 of her flock members this week. And I wanted to let her know that we are all here for you, Eva. And if there's, you need someone to vent to, but we definitely do want to let you know that you are in our hearts and your birds are as well. And you'll get through this. It's not going to be easy. I don't lie to friends, so I wouldn't do that. But our hearts go out to you, and we just wanted to let you know that that was the case. So, so sorry, Eva, for your loss. Um, I do need to ask you guys to be a little flexible with me in the next couple of weeks. I am in the process of moving. You think I'm going south, don't you guys? No, no. I decided to go further north. I'm going to Maine. So things are kind of in flux. I need to be flexible. I learned from Funk tonight that I need to be a little more flexible. Um, Next week, we're going to be talking about conservation. I have a couple of guests that may be joining me. I just need to nail that down. But if you guys will be flexible with me, I will, be back every week with Flock Talk. So we might take some time off. I decided Nick deserved a night off. I'm going to blame it on Nick. There we go. Nick needed a night off, so we will not be on the night of the 29th. Nick's like that's Nick's way of telling me to focus. But all right. You guys take care, and I hope that you think about what we talked about tonight, and maybe it helps a little bit in your situation at home. And I will see you all next week on Flock Talk. Take care, everyone. Bye bye.